Hello, welcome to this week's episode of the India Story, the only show which brings the top stories and the big newsmakers from India to a global audience. We look at the dramatic changes that are taking place in India and we debate some of the further steps that can be taken to drive the India story forward and to take the country to its rightful place as a developed nation. And today, we're going to discuss just one of those possible further steps, the entire question of capital account convertibility. Obviously, the trigger is the recent controversy over the tax collected on source and credit card payments overseas. The government has partially rolled that step back, but this has raised a bigger question. Given that India now has a really booming economy and plenty of foreign exchange reserves, is it time for India to now take the next step to remove all forex restrictions and to begin to shift towards capital account convertibility? To understand this, we're going to be having on the show two of the biggest and the best voices on the theme. Top Indian economist Dr. Surjit Bhalla and former Deputy Governor of the Reserve Bank of India, Ramasubramaniam Gandhi. Both of them are going to be joining us. Also on the show, former Raw Chief and Special Director of the Indian Intelligence Bureau, A.S. Dulat, will be joining us to decode the implications and the key takeaways of the major G20 meet that was just held in Srinagar, the first major international event in the valley in quite a long period of time. Also, a special chat with director Kanu Behl on his latest film, which was received by a standing ovation at the Cannes Film Festival. All of this and much more coming up for you. But first, a quick look at the major headlines you should be tracking. A large number of India's opposition parties to boycott the new parliament inauguration by Prime Minister Modi. 21 opposition parties announced the boycott, accusing the Prime Minister of sidelining President Draupadi Murmu. The BJP says that the opposition is disrespecting Parliament. One person killed, the state minister's house targeted as fresh violence hits the northeastern state of Manipur. Indefinite curfews been imposed in parts of the state, including capital Imphal. Home Minister Amit Shah says he will visit the state soon. Yet another setback for India's Project Cheetah as 3 cubs born last month die in Madhya Pradesh's Kuno Park. The government forms a high park committee to monitor the project after the death of 6 cheetahs since March. India will not tolerate attacks on temples in Australia. The Indian Prime Minister reiterates concerns over Khalistani activities on Australian soil. Strict action is being taken, assures the Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. Tech giant Meta's mass layoffs hit India. Top executives across marketing and administration divisions have been sacked. More than 10,000 jobs are to be axed globally in what are being described as the final round of job cuts. On this show, we've been telling you about the growth of the India story, the rising GDP, the big new infrastructure projects, the digital transformation, and so on. But we're also going to keep looking at the next steps. What else needs to be done? How can India become a fully developed economy in a time-bound period? There are many such steps that can be discussed and debated, the pros and cons thought through, and then, hopefully, action taken. Take foreign exchange, for example. It once used to be the most scarce of commodities. Today, India has $600 billion. As talk of de-dollarization gathers ground and India takes a more central role in the global economy, is it time to change our attitude to forex? Is it, for example, time to think about capital account convertibility? Two of the biggest experts in the area are about to join me to discuss that. But first, the immediate trigger for this debate. The government recently amended the rules to bring international credit card spends under LRS, or the Liberalized Remittance Scheme. Beginning July the 1st, if you spend money abroad using a credit card, it will attract a 20% TCS, or tax collected at source. You'll get it back eventually, if you have to get a refund, but at least in the beginning stages, there will be a TCS. Now, this entire move was met by much criticism, after which the government made some changes and said this will only apply to expenses more than 7 lakh rupees per annum. Now, the government's rationale for this move is that while payments made by debit cards were already covered under LRS, expenditures under credit cards were not accounted for, which led to some people exceeding the $250,000 limit and bypassing the LRS rules. The government says that the new system will remove the differential treatment between debit cards and credit cards. The total expenditure under LRS will be properly captured, and will also be able to make sure that nobody is trying to subvent things or people aren't sending undisclosed income abroad. Now, critics say that a better idea would be to remove restrictions altogether and that none of this is actually required. But let's step away from the limited debate around LRS and around these credit cards and take a look at a bigger question. Many experts have argued that all of these restrictions and controls around foreign exchange are in any case a relic of the past. A past where India was a much smaller economy and a country with very limited foreign exchange reserves. In 2023, the situation is very different, and hence, perhaps our entire attitude needs to change. Perhaps we need to think big. Perhaps we even need to consider steps towards capital account convertibility. Dr. Bhalla, great to have you back in Delhi, fresh from Washington after running a lot of the IMF. Of course, thanks for being here. I want to talk to you, first of all, about the broader question, which is capital account convertibility and whether we should head there. But first, you've also been writing about LRS and these changes and whether it should be 7 lakhs or not 7 lakhs and credit card or not credit card. So let's start with that. What's your sense of some of these changes and what do you think should be done?
I think we are definitely at a stage where the value contribution of these restrictions is negative, is zilch. Negative because it's unnecessary. I don't know whether harassment is too strong a word, but unnecessary bureaucratic interference for data that the government already has. So in that sense, what's the logic behind it? And, the 7 lakhs should be removed to no amount. You can send in whatever, as long as it is done through legal channels, which is all that we are talking about here. We do not know what happens in illegal channels. The government is concerned about deducting TDS on income that people have already earned and that they are legally allowed to spend abroad. If we go above the $250,000 per person limit, then that's a violation of the laws. And the government should clearly act on those. I happen to think that, 250,000 was brought in 2015 or 16. The Indian economy has been growing quite robustly. And maybe that should be expanded to eventually not have it at all. That's what the mark of a developed economy is. And we clearly have very reasonable aspirations and ambitions to be a developed economy. And I think that's what we should be moving toward.
So let's come back to the question of capital account convertibility. That's, of course, the main subject I want to talk to you about. Is it time for India, or is it premature to say, look, there's de-dollarization happening? The Chinese are trying very hard to make the yuan an exchange currency of some sort or the other. Now, there's no reason why India, as the third largest economy in the world a few years from now, we don't necessarily, we shouldn't be having a weak currency there. We don't need to be worrying about protecting it. We don't have to worry perhaps about foreign exchange to the same level. So say, move towards capital account convertibility. Let's do it in a phased manner so there are no external shocks. But at least let's start thinking about it and planning for it.
Yeah, and I just want to emphasize what you just added. Do it in a phased manner. Absolutely. That was the original intent 25 years ago, to do it in a phased manner. That was the intent 20 years ago or 18 years ago, to do it in a phased manner. That's the official policy of the RBI, of the government of India, states. So absolutely, we should we have not made any progress towards capital account convertibility since 2006 or 2015 when we expanded the LRS. And now we should move further in that direction to allow, so that maybe if you want me, I would say the target should be no more than a decade from now, possibly by the end of this decade, we should have full capital account convertibility. And the time to start is now.
All right. So let's try and get the roadmap from you. Let's say we said we want to move towards capital account convertibility 10 years from now. I mean, remember, we've just overtaken Britain. 10 years from now, India could be double the size of the British economy. So we'll be right up there. So by that time, perhaps we should be thinking about capital account convertibility.
I'm making it sooner, 2030.
2030, okay, even better. 7 years from now, we want to move towards capital account convertibility. Now, if that is what we are doing, then what are the policies we should be setting into place? Because obviously, in that situation, capital account convertibility, you're not going to be having LRS and $250,000 limits, or it means you can do anything. You can send billions of dollars abroad, get billions of dollars back inside, complete freeing up. That's what capital account convertibility would mean. What do we have to do from now?
Some of it we've discussed. Now you're asking for a roadmap, and unfortunately, I'm not in a position to outline the roadmap. That's for the government to do.
Okay, so your suggestions of a specific roadmap.
Yeah, suggestions would make to the government. First, the very simple step of this credit card business, 7 lakh business goes out of the window tomorrow. So it should have happened yesterday. So that's number one. Then you say that, listen, perhaps in the beginning, the other one that the government has been trying to do, which is very important, that foreigners can buy our treasuries. Okay, that is very much a necessary part of capital account convertibility. That our treasuries are open. China has opened it, and etc. And we will have to open our bond markets to foreigners. Okay, that's the second step. Hopefully that, and the government has explicitly talked about it. It was to come in last year or whatever, some suggestion. And so that should happen. I hope it will happen.
Okay, what about Indians sending money abroad? What happens with that?
I would phase it to, maybe increase it every year as a token right now, maybe 500,000 in a year or two. Then 1 million, and then it's completely open up. Has to be done in a phased manner. But target is 2030, you'll be able to send out as much money as you would like.
All right, Dr. Bhalla, the advantages of what you're saying are clear. You're saying recognize your skills, understand your skills, have confidence in yourself. But now, what are the risks? Because I'm sure if the government is looking at this entire discussion and saying, well, that's a nice idea, but there could be problems, there could be threats, there could be risks. So what are the risks?
Okay, so what can go wrong? We've got $600 billion worth of reserves. Let me expand on that a little bit. What the country's exchange rate, or whether they have balance of payments problems, are measured by the ratio of reserves, of imports to reserves. How many months of imports does a country have? Months of imports in terms of reserves. Okay? India is amongst the top 5 countries in the world, excluding the oil companies. So, so I don't know what can go wrong, quite honestly, because let us see what we all agree on, okay, or what the risks are, to put it in your terms. What we all agree on is that everyone, hopefully even the opposition, that the Indian economy is quite robust, number one. Education has increased, though manifold, though I think we still have some distance to go on improving the quality of education. But human capital of the Indian economy is considerably better than it ever was. Okay. So growth, let's look at growth and human capital and investment. Our investment rates are in the mid-30s. Our human capital is good, and therefore our growth rate is the best in the world. The best. Okay. So what can go wrong? You tell me.
All right, Dr. Bhalla, you make a cogent argument. I think, look, I'm glad that this debate has at least started, because as India has to grow, if India has to become one of the most developed, one of the most prosperous nations in the world, which I think is everyone's aim, it's important to debate and discuss and have all of these conversations out there so that they can actually be debated. I'm sure there will be people who have a different point of view. We would love to hear those different points of view. Please send them to us. We would like to see what the benefits are, what the pros are, what the cons are. And it's only with that debate and that discussion that we will be making the correct policies and have the right steps to take the India story forward. Thanks, Dr. Bhalla, for joining us. But I am going to start by getting another voice in to really brainstorm the possible steps that need to be taken or that can be taken towards capital account convertibility, and whether we need to be easier in general in the entire question of foreign exchange. Who better to talk to than Ramasubramanian Gandhi, who's the former Deputy Governor of the Reserve Bank of India, who's looked very closely at currency management and is the right person, therefore, to give his views. Now, Mr. Gandhi, thank you so much for joining us. The subject of rules and regulation, LRS, has been something that's, of course, been discussed in the last couple of weeks. So, Mr. Gandhi, is there a view that as we're moving towards becoming a more developed economy with plentiful foreign exchange reserves, is this the right time to start getting a roadmap for foreign exchange, more freedom there, perhaps even capital account convertibility?
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to share some little thoughts on the issue. First of all, the conservation of foreign exchange was an objective under FERA, not under FEMA. Under FEMA, the approach has completely changed. It is not conservation of foreign exchange, rather facilitating foreign exchange transaction by residents and non-residents in a much more comfortable or easier way. That's why when the FEMA came, that was a very big shift between FERA and FEMA. So over this 20 years, 23 years since FEMA has come into being, consistently, Reserve Bank and along with the government has taken the stance that we will be going more and more into easing the foreign exchange operations to be carried out by the citizens. But it won't be fully completely left to the market and citizens. There's full convertibility is a process. Someday we may reach, but every step will be closer to that. But at any point in time, so far, we have not yet come to that conclusion that we are fully ready for it.
You know, sir, you're right in saying that FEMA is more about management. It's not entirely about restrictions as well. But some of the things that we are seeing, like this entire debate over LRS is a limit. You can only send $250,000 in a certain year. And there could be restrictions in other areas, whether it comes to ODI or other such changes. Now, as we move forward towards more and more liberalization and potential convertibility, do you think that even these restrictions should be progressively, systematically, in a phased manner, eased, liberalized?
Some 6 months before, Deputy Governor Ravi Shankar has mentioned that India is now maybe ready for further relaxation relating to all these parameters, including internationalization of the rupee. So that way, it's a time to do that. Yes, individually, the $250,000 which we have fixed, it is quite some time before, almost, I would think that it is about 10 years, near about that. So obviously that ceiling can certainly be revisited, given the position that aspirations of the Indian citizens, because we have now have more disposable income, that would mean that we have more savings. So the savings, one would want to have investment, a dispersed way of investing, not only within India, and opportunities that is available elsewhere also should be made available for Indian citizens. So that way, the LRS, by the way, it is meant for, primarily meant for current account transaction. It was not, it should not be seen as that is meant for capital account related. It is permitted under that, but by definitely an investment orientation that Indian citizens to invest, facilitate their investment abroad, that could be a separate ceiling, or the current ceiling of 250 and LRs could be enhanced to facilitate that. I agree with that, we should be thinking in those terms.
So, sir, when you're looking at this from the point of view of the Reserve Bank of India and the fact that this should be a phased process, so it should be controlled in some way, what is the rationale in 2023 because of all of these controls? India obviously has a fair amount of foreign exchange. So is this essentially to make sure there's no hot money flows, there's no destabilization as problems happen in the global economy? Those external factors should not cause disruption in India. Is that essentially the reason why we do have these controls in the first place today?
Right. If you recall, Tarapur committee, both in number 1 and number 2 committees have consistently recommended there are certain preconditions before we think about relaxing further. One is inflation control, that it starts from there. Then the government fiscal deficit situation. Then the banking sector health, the asset quality, and so these three are some of the common expectations that we should be comfortable around these parameters before we think about opening up more. Today, touch wood, we have reached that kind of stage. Inflation, because of the inflation targeting MPC, it is more or less we are able to bring it to single digit and low single digit kind of situation. So inflation, fairly, we can believe that it is manageable. Then the government fiscal deficit also, thanks to last 2-3 years of consistent enhancement in the tax collections and the administration, the government was able to keep it within the targets which they have announced around the budget time, and going forward also further consolidation is expected. So reasonably, that also we can believe that we are in a pretty good situation. CAD, of course, that is always the issue because we are yet to really have a leapfrog in export earnings. Now, that's what we would ultimately want to have export surplus that we have not yet reached. That would still remain a negative proposition, and thanks also to our dependency on oil. So CAD perhaps will still remain an area where we have not yet reached the desired position.
All right, Mr. Gandhi, thank you so much for joining us with that perspective. Thank you so much. Right, let's move on to our next story. On March 13th this year, India announced in New York that G20 events would be held across the country, from Kanyakumari to Kashmir. 5 weeks later, terrorists attacked an army truck and killed 5 soldiers in Poonch in Jammu and Kashmir. 2 weeks after this, 5 more army soldiers died in a blast triggered by terrorists in Rajouri. The attacks may have been an attempt to try and derail what has actually been planned in Kashmir this week. But India was undeterred and was able to successfully organize a mega 3-day international event in Srinagar. This was the biggest international event held in Jammu and Kashmir since Article 370 was diluted and the state was turned into a union territory. A meeting of the G20 Tourism Working Group hosted in Srinagar between May 22nd and the 24th. Issues like ecotourism, destination management, all of these were, of course, reportedly discussed. A draft strategy to promote India as a destination for film tourism was also released. This was the third meeting, with the earlier ones being held in West Bengal and in Gujarat. Goa will be the next host. While the previous meetings happened smoothly, this time the usual suspects went ballistic as the Kashmir event grew nearer. China said it firmly opposes G20 meetings being held in what it called disputed territory, and it said it would not attend the event. Beijing had skipped another G20 program in Ladakh. India said it was natural to hold events in Kashmir and in Ladakh, as they are, of course, inalienable parts of the country. Pakistan, which is not even a G20 member and so has absolutely no local standard in the matter, accused India of displaying what it called arrogance and pettiness and said Delhi was violating international law. Now, India's foreign minister said he would not debate this issue with a non-member of G20, a clear reference, of course, to Pakistan. The Indian government pulled out all stops to prevent any disturbance in the valley. Marine commandos or Marcos were seen patrolling the Dal Lake, the Jhelum River, and other water bodies. Commandos of the elite NSG conducted area domination exercises and also secured the iconic Lal Chowk anti-drone equipment was deployed to keep an eye on the sky. The Indian Army, the BSF, the CRPF, the Sashtra Seema Bal, and of course the Jammu and Kashmir Police completed the comprehensive three-tier security grid, all of which made sure that nothing untoward actually happened. Finally, on May the 22nd, the G20 event kicked off. Jammu and Kashmir's cultural wealth was on full display as the delegates roamed around the historic city. 61 delegates from 29 countries did show up. They participated in the meeting. Srinagar saw a higher participation compared to the earlier meetings of the tourism working group. The event did gather a lot of positives for Jammu and Kashmir and for India in general. One of the biggest takeaways from the event was that it showed that normalcy was coming back to the valley. The very fact that an event like this was able to be held and 29 countries came was a major factor. This was also demonstrated by the rather crucial point that residents ignored calls for a shutdown by separatist elements. Another key highlight is that because of the heavy security deployments, foreign delegations saw firsthand the threat that was being posed by terrorists sponsored by Pakistan. The G20 program also displayed tourism opportunities in Kashmir to the international community. Of course, it is the most beautiful part of the country in many ways. It's debatable, I know, but many people would say it's the most beautiful part of the country. So in a sense, it was great that the international delegates got a chance to actually experience that for themselves. On the economic front, the event acted as an invitation to investors by demonstrating the efficiency of the security apparatus to maintain peace. Amid all of this, China and Pakistan did try one last ploy. While Beijing completely skipped the event, some other countries chose to send private or low-level delegations. These included Turkey and Saudi Arabia, Islamic countries which have been vocal on Kashmir, either individually or through the OIC. Egypt and Oman, who are not G20 members but were specially invited by India, also stayed away from the Srinagar meetings. But this, of course, was overshadowed by the response of the other countries, including the G7 group of rich nations. America left no room for speculation, but its delegation chief saying he was happy to participate in the meeting in Srinagar. By successfully pulling off this major event, has India emphatically won the perception battle on Kashmir? Is it an important step, though, that should now be built on to take other steps specifically when it comes to Jammu and Kashmir? And let's now talk to somebody who's a real expert on Jammu and Kashmir and who's been talking a lot about the steps that need to be taken forward, looking ahead in Jammu and Kashmir, India's ex-spy master and a real authority on Jammu and Kashmir, Mr. A.S. Dullat. Well, Mr. Dullat, always a pleasure to talk to you and to get your sense of what is happening. It's increasingly rare that you actually agree to come and talk, so it's good to talk to you. You must be have kept a very close eye on what's happened with G20, and it's a major positive that India was able to successfully pull off this entire G20 event in Srinagar with all the world's diplomats out there. How do you interpret what's happened in Srinagar this week?
No, I think it's a very good positive thing that it's happening. This is a question that I tried to answer to Karan with my last interview. He asked me the same thing. I said, I think it's a great move because it shows that there's normality there, whatever we're trying to project. But I thought that, this was perhaps not the best time because this is the peak tourist season. And however we look at it, for these 3, 4, 5 days, it's going to disrupt tourism, because Srinagar has been turned into a sort of a fortress with a lot of security all around. So it's not the ideal sort of situation for tourists. But I'm sure tourists will come back and things will be all right. The other thing is the negative part of whatever is happening in Srinagar is that the Muslim countries have opted out. Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Egypt, and of course China. So, the Kashmiris look at it like this, that the Muslims then are in support of us, we have problems. And the Muslim countries haven't come. The only Muslim representation there is from Indonesia, I think. And the diplomats that you talk about, I'm told, that other than Singapore, whose ambassador is there, they are low-level people from the embassies. So all these things get noted. Kashmiri he doesn't miss anything, And the general sense in Kashmir, although they are reconciled to 370 and all that, they know it's gone. But it's not a very happy state of affairs in Kashmir. That there's nothing happening. There's nothing positive from the Kashmiri point of view. And I've always said time and time again that the way forward, if you want to move forward, is that you revive the old political and democratic process.
Okay, I'm going to discuss all of those in some detail, but obviously first the G20 aspect. Do you think India was successful in sending a certain message on the global stage on Jammu and Kashmir? The fact that a G20 event could be held and held safely and successfully in Srinagar, did that help in projecting a certain image? Yes, a couple of countries didn't come, but overall, was there a certain image that was successfully projected to the rest of the world?
Yeah, I think it does in a sense that, you've got so many diplomats there and you've got them in Srinagar and they'll go back home to Delhi or wherever safely. I think it's a good positive thing because, one of the problems in Kashmir is that even bureaucrats from Delhi don't visit Kashmir. And the setup that we have in Kashmir, because there's a lieutenant governor in charge, most of the bureaucrats in Kashmir today are outsiders. So that again is resented locally. Who do we talk to? There's no Kashmiri here. So the general feeling in Kashmir is that the worst government is better than what we have. Because at least it will be our people and we'll be able to approach somebody.
So basically you're saying build on this and at some point the political process should restart now.
Absolutely. I don't see it happening, but I do feel it should restart. Incidentally, today, Chomsky has made a very powerful statement criticizing this whole business of holding G20 in Srinagar. And that has been put out by the Hurriyat conference. The Hurriyat itself has not said anything, but they put out Chomsky on their post.
So on that question, Mr. Dulat, obviously, look, the hold of the Hurriyat clearly does seem to be going down. And even when it comes to Pakistan, given the chaos and the mayhem that is taking place inside Pakistan, you could argue that the ability of Pakistan to be seen as effective in anything, including in Jammu and Kashmir, has gone down dramatically. Would you agree with that view? And does that, therefore, throw up certain opportunities as well?
I do agree with it. Pakistan is in a hell of a mess. But for the Kashmiri, he still holds out. It's not that the Kashmiri wants to go to Pakistan or join Pakistan. That's long over. And let me also make it clear that the Hurriyat is dead. There is no Hurriyat now. Separatism is over. There's just one gentleman who is, under house arrest, who is still of substance. And I think we are wasting him, and that's the meanwhile. Because he's sufficiently mainstream. And I don't think there's much difference between him and the National Conference or Mehbooba or whatever it is that they're thinking. But since he doesn't have a say, and he's been kept in his house, he can't come to the mosque even. So it's a nothing thing there. I don't think separatism is an issue, and I don't think in the sense that you mentioned, Pakistan is not an issue. But what I want to try to say is that Pakistan provides that little sort of support or hope that if India and Pakistan have a better relationship, then things in Kashmir will improve. That's the way the Kashmiri looks at it.
Right, Mr. Dulat, but if I could just put it to you, I don't see New Delhi having too much interest in talking to Pakistan right now, especially given the mess that Pakistan is. whom are you going to talk to in Pakistan? Who is actually in charge out there? And even if you do talk to somebody in Pakistan, are they in any position to deliver on anything that they might say to you? There could be an argument made that, look, Kashmir is an internal matter. That's the way it should be viewed. This could be an opportunity to do something internally more attractive than talking to Pakistan. Take advantages of the opportunity that there could be in the valley right now, especially after G20. As you were saying, separatism could be dead. Pakistan is in a mess and may have been wiped out. Not that much violence or militancy taking place right now. Restart some political dialogue, perhaps internally. Talk to your own people, do something internally, and ignore Pakistan. Would that be a particular point of view on how to take things forward now?
Absolutely. But I'd like to correct you here on one little point that you made, that militancy or terrorism is down. You know, recently in the Jammu area, things have been pretty bad. There have been two, three very bad attacks on the army there. And if you know that area, the Poonch Rajouri area, the army is in full control there. It may be the Rashtriya Rifles or whatever it is, and it's been deadly attacks there. And it's a vulnerable area. It's not easy. And that Bimbar Gully and Suran Court and all that thing, it's not the end of it, to my way of thinking. And I'm also apprehensive that you know, most of the militancy, and I make a differentiate between militancy and terrorism. I would like to think that militancy is our homegrown thing, boys in South Kashmir mostly. But what happens in the north, that's the deadliest attacks take place there, because that's where the foreign terrorists are. And whether they are in Baramulla or Sopore or Kupwara, we don't know. You know that in the last couple of years, we've had attacks in Srinagar, which never happened after the early 90s. You know, they have targeted whoever they like, and quite a few Kashmiri Pandits have been killed. That lady who was a teacher in a sick lady in a school, she was shot, and outside laborers have been killed. So, you know, it's not over. And I would think that even whatever mess Pakistan may be in, which it is, the ISI is still functioning.
All right, Mr. Dullah, thank you so much. Always a pleasure talking to you. Build on G20, build on the G20 summit in Srinagar by taking steps forward in Jammu and Kashmir is your advice. Thank you so much for joining us. Right, let's move now to our regular segment, which is scanning the global newspapers for all sorts of articles on India. And perhaps not surprisingly, a lot of coverage this week in India, especially when it comes to the Australian papers, with Prime Minister Modi being out there. So this week, for example, an article in the Australian discussing the growing relationship between India and Australia, acknowledging historical disengagement but emphasizing recent commitment. It noted the significance of the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to Sydney and the importance that India is increasingly placing on Australia politically, strategically, and due to the Indian diaspora. The article argued that while the US has shaped Australia's perspective, India does not need to be an identical ally to be a valuable partner. The article said, rather, the test for our partnership is a commitment to a common set of strategic interests in the Indo-Pacific, to be addressed by a dual-track approach, practical options for security and prosperity, while constraining the most malicious activities of Beijing across territorial encroachment, technological oppression, and foreign influence. Meanwhile, a report in Japan's daily newspaper, the Asahi Shimbun, points out that the meeting between the leaders of India and Ukraine on the sidelines of the G7 summit in Hiroshima had the potential to impact the relationship between India and Russia. While the G7 nations, of course, condemned Russia's activities and actions in Ukraine, India has always maintained a somewhat ambiguous stance due to its old relationship with Russia and, to some extent, that reliance on Russian oil and weapon systems. The meeting between the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the Ukrainian President Zelensky was being seen as an opportunity to bring India closer to the camp of democratic nations. It could potentially change the strategic balance in the Ukrainian conflict, the report said. The report also noted India's role as a chair of the upcoming G20 summit in September and it said it could provide an opportunity for the Indian Prime Minister to influence the peace process in Ukraine. Coverage of Prime Minister Modi's rally with the diaspora in Sydney was, of course, very prominently there in many Australian newspapers, including the Sydney Morning Herald. Here are some of the images and the articles that were up on that. And there was a lot of mention, of course, of his visit to Papua New Guinea in the newspapers of Papua New Guinea. The Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea, James Marape, has said that the special greeting gesture he made to the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi when he arrived at Port Moresby was a sign of respect, reported the country's daily The National. This sort of respect is not bestowed to every person, the article quoted the country's Prime Minister as saying. And finally, the India story at Cannes. After his debut feature, Titli, premiered at Cannes in 2014, director Kanu Bell, who steers complex and unusual subjects in his films, returned to the festival with his latest work this week, and it got a standing ovation. Bell's film Agra was the only Indian feature selected in the Director's Fortnight, and it received a 5-minute standing ovation at its premiere at Cannes. Just like Bell's debut, which explored a dysfunctional family, Agra, set in a small town in Uttar Pradesh, also explores complex family dynamics through the lens of a sexually repressed young man portrayed by newcomer Mohit Agarwal. All right, Kanu, tell us about the Cannes experience. What is it like?
Well, it's the usual experience, Vikram. There are many films, there are beautiful films, and there are many filmmakers from all across the world. It's the best place to be with some of the best cinema playing around you. So it's always a pleasure, just to be able to come and see what is happening, what is the latest in cinema, and what filmmakers from across the world are doing. It's like a nice little mela, and so we are enjoying the mela.
Okay, Kanu, talk to us a little bit about a film like Agra. The clear theme that you're looking out there, and it's a theme that you're familiar with, I guess, is the dynamics of families. How do families work, especially in small town setting? This clearly is a subject that seems to be very close to your heart.
Yeah, I mean, Agra specifically, I think, is a film about sexuality and sexual repression, and it looks at the idea of physical spaces, the physical spaces that we inhabit. So it's about how our sexuality and our sexual lives affect the physical spaces that we live in, and how in turn the physical spaces end up affecting how we express ourselves sexually. So, it really got seeded from my growing up years in Delhi, early years in Patiala, Punjab, then Delhi, then later even in Calcutta as a young man growing up. I saw that there was not a lot of space around me. और फिर मुझे लगा कि मैं तो फिर भी थोड़ा privileged हूँ. I'm still middle class. I live in a 3-bedroom house. But I saw so many stories around me, so many young boys, men struggling to express their sexuality and to express themselves with other women. And in many ways, I sensed a certain repressed violence around this. And we've all been privy to those sort of bursts of violence in life around us over the last few years, especially since Nirbhaya, it's been in the spotlight. But we eventually have no insight into the lives of these men, into the lives of these boys, also especially because we live in such a deeply patriarchal society. And within the patriarchal society now, given the whole Me Too movement and all that, it's become even more difficult for men to express themselves in a certain way, and to find articulation for what they might be feeling.
Kanu, this crucial question that you address in Agra, the question of sexual violence. When it comes to something like rape, when it comes to sexual violence also within the family, it's a big story here in India. It needs to be told a lot more, discussed a lot more. A lot of people, after many of the rapes that have taken place out here, say it's linked to power dynamics. You seem to be saying it can also be linked to sexual repression, and that repression can be influenced by a lack of privacy, if I understand you correctly.
Absolutely. There can be a myriad reasons. There are probably hundreds of reasons, but I think when I started exploring, when I started writing the screenplay, I somehow felt like we needed a very human into understanding this person, however difficult a character this might be, however unacceptable, and whatever dastardly things he might end up doing, and I'm specifically here talking about Guru, the protagonist of Agra, I felt like we really needed to look at Guru from within, from inside, and try to understand what's really going on with him, to be able to have any hope of understanding sexual repression and violence, so that ये actually कभी खत्म करने का chance हो. Because after it happens, if we just other the person and say अरे इसने ये कर दिया अभी इसको बंद कर दो, then that's no point. We are never really truly going to be able to be any closer to solving it. And the most human way of understanding this for me was in all its socio-political cultural glory. And I think the very simple idea of the spaces we inhabit and the transactionality in all our relationships today. There's human transactionality in all these relationships, and that combines very, very closely with the idea of the limited space. I mean, we are the most populous country in the world, or will be very soon, and we, compared to China, we have very little landmass, so we're just packed in like a tin of sardines, anyway. So yeah, so that's somewhere where I was trying to go and play with this.
Kanuna, just to understand the dynamics of how the industry is increasingly moving, now you as a filmmaker, when you're making the sort of films that you love to make, these are not necessarily films that are designed for the mass audience. There used to be a time when people used to say, we want to make films that are meaningful, that are telling a certain story, popularly, I guess, called art cinema, and it is meant to be shown at film festivals. It's meant for places like Toronto or Cannes. Now, is that entire space opening up? Because presumably many of these films could do well on OTT or Movie or other such platforms. Is that change started to meaningfully happen already or not yet? Or no?
I'm not so sure, Vikram, to be honest. In fact, I feel somewhere the space is shrinking. Because anyway, cinema overall has taken, all sorts of cinema has taken a little bit of hit in the post-pandemic world. We are still recovering. Effect of that anyway goes towards art house cinema because it's not traditionally valued, and that to me is really the sad part, because there is very little space for any sort of nuanced, forget cinema, in all forms of art. I think the most crucial thing that I'm observing as an artist is that the space for nuance is completely disappearing. And that harks back, I feel, to a much larger cultural problem, because the space for nuance in our culture is disappearing. I mean, we culturally, Indians were the most nuanced people on the planet. We were the ones who never had to take a position. We could say, "Acha, right wing mein ye acha hai, ye bura hai. Left mein ye acha hai, ye bura hai." And we used to we used to find great pleasure in being in the center. But now we live in times where you have to take a position. You can't be on either side. And I think the effects of that are being felt everywhere. And art just reflects life as it happens around you.
Yeah, Kanu, you're preaching to the converted. I'm a journalist, and I remember the time when it used to be a virtue to tell an unbiased story and being balanced about it. Now, it's not necessarily the way it should be. You're supposed to be yelling and shouting and having a particular point of view. So yeah, preaching to the converted. But thank you so much for joining us. All the best, and many, many congratulations for that smash success at Cannes and that 5-minute standing ovation that you actually got. Kanu Behl, thank you so much for joining us. And that's all we have time for on this episode of The India Story. But we'll be back again next week, taking a look at the biggest developments and the biggest stories out of India for a global audience, and also talking to the biggest newsmakers out of India. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.